Sheikh Zayed used to say that the true strength of a nation is not measured by the extent of its borders, but by the stability of its soul. When he looked at the West, especially the United States, he saw a society extraordinary in ingenuity, yet restless in essence. He saw abundance without serenity, wealth without peace, power without direction. And for a man who came from the desert, where everything is achieved through patience and faith, this sounded like the natural prelude to decline. He saw the American empire as an impressive creation, but one built on shifting sand, an economy that grows from consumption rather than production, a society nourished by credit rather than character. In the years when oil transformed the Gulf into a strategic region, Zayed learned to observe the numbers coming from Washington with the same care he gave to the dunes, because both move with the wind. What he saw, and what few at the time wanted to admit, was that the wealth of the United States had become hostage to a financial system that manufactures instant prosperity, but not lasting prosperity. In Zayed's view, any economy sustained by permanent debt is spiritually ill. He said that whoever lives owing lives dependent, and whoever is dependent is no longer free. This logic applies both to the individual and to the empire. Over the decades, the United States became a nation that spends more than it produces and prints more than it possesses. A giant kept standing by the credit of others. To Zayed, this was a sign that trust had replaced truth, that faith in the dollar had become a religion more powerful than any prayer. But what impressed him most was not the economic imbalance. It was the moral one. He saw a country capable of feeding the world, yet leaving millions of its own citizens in poverty. A society that speaks of freedom, but has become imprisoned by consumption. A people with faith in technology, but no faith in destiny. He said that prosperity that does not elevate the soul is merely temporary luxury. The West, in Zayed's eyes, confused movement with progress and innovation with wisdom. In Arab tradition, wealth is something to be shared. Money that does not circulate is considered sterile. Profit that generates no benefit is seen as imbalance. For this reason, Sheikh Zayed was perplexed by the American logic of extreme competition. The idea that one person's success must mean another's failure. In the desert, survival has always been a collective act. In the modern market, survival has become a solitary act. This inversion was, for him, the true collapse. Not the collapse of the financial system, but the collapse of the sense of community. He believed that the United States was committing the same mistake made by all empires before it, believing that economic power guarantees immortality. But Zayed knew the lesson the desert teaches. Everything without deep roots yields to the wind. The American empire had rooted its strength in consumption, image, and credit, but no longer in virtue, restraint, and unity. He saw a nation brilliant in appearance, but fragmented within. For Sheikh Zayed, the true American crisis was not in the fiscal deficit, but in the deficit of purpose. A society that loses its why inevitably loses its how. When money becomes the center of a civilization, everything else revolves around it. Politics, culture, faith, even morality. And when money wavers, everything else loses balance. He said that money should serve as a river, not as a throne. But the West built golden thrones and forgot the river of humanity that should flow beneath them. This was, for Zayed, the root of the problem. The West, and the United States in particular, replaced the idea of barakah, the divine blessing that gives meaning to wealth, with the idea of infinite profit. And profit without limit is like water without a riverbed. It destroys the soil it should nourish. He watched with concern the pace of consumption, the growing indebtedness of families, the social loneliness born from material abundance. To him, none of this was progress. It was exhaustion disguised as success. And yet, Zayed did not despise the West. He saw it as a brilliant brother who had gone astray, not as an enemy. Arab wisdom never denies greatness. It only warns of the excesses that threaten it. He believed that the end is not destruction, but correction. The end he spoke of, and which would give meaning to the phrase on the thumbnail, would be the end of an illusion. The illusion that power can be sustained without morality, wealth without justice, and freedom without limits. Sheikh Zayed saw power as a loan, not as a possession. He believed that every civilization has a cycle. It rises when it finds purpose and declines when it loses it. For him, the United States was passing through exactly this turning point. the phase in which material greatness becomes so abundant that it begins to erode the very foundations that sustain it. In his reading, this was the natural destiny of every empire that confuses the shine of gold with the light of wisdom. Zayed observed that the strength of the United States originated in the creativity and courage of its people, genuine virtues admired by him. But over time, that same energy shifted from creation to consumption. American society, which once built railways, bridges, and industries, began to build only debt. The economy ceased to be a field of production and became a financial spectacle. For the Sheikh, this was the breaking point. When money stops representing value and begins to create value out of nothing, society starts to live in illusion. He did not believe in sudden collapses. He believed in gradual ones, invisible at first. And he saw the decline of the United States not as an explosion, but as a slow emptying of meaning. The signs were everywhere: indebted families, exhausting work without purpose, a culture of excess and loneliness, growing inequality. The richest country in the world had also become one of the most anxious. For him, this was not coincidence, it was consequence. When a people's economy disconnects from its spiritual values, emptiness appears, first in the soul, then in the numbers. Zayed often repeated that the economy is a reflection of morality. This idea, born of his Islamic tradition, is simple and stark. If a man's heart is pure, his prosperity is stable. If the heart is corrupted, wealth abandons him. He saw the American economy as a powerful structure, but contaminated by greed and waste. Waste, in particular, shocked him. In the Emirates, water was treated as sacred. In the United States, waste was a symbol of abundance. Excess, he said, is the first step towards scarcity. The Arab vision, shaped by the desert, has always understood that survival depends on balance. The West, by contrast, learned to think in terms of infinite growth, a concept that, to Zayed, was logically impossible. Nothing in nature grows forever. Balance comes from pause, from limits, from respect for cycles. He said that the land teaches humility because those who take too much lose everything. This phrase, though simple, summarizes the criticism he would make of the American economy. The country took too much, from the planet, from other peoples, from itself, and began to lose what once made it exemplary. But the Sheikh also saw solutions. He believed that what separates the desert from collapse is intention. The desert, even when arid, is still fertile for those who plant with faith. In the same way, he said, the United States could regenerate if it reconnected its economy to morality. That meant replacing the cult of consumption with respect for creation, valuing useful work over speculative activity, and restoring the centrality of community over the individual. He believed that no empire is incapable of change, only too proud to try. In Arab tradition, wealth has a spiritual function, to sustain justice. It is seen as a trust, a mana, not as a trophy. The wealthy person is a guardian of balance, not its owner. Sheikh Zayed applied this principle to his governance. He used oil to build schools, housing, and hospitals, not merely to strengthen state power. This was the opposite of the American model, in which growth concentrates in the hands of a few. For him, extreme inequality was not only a social issue, it was a moral failure. He said that money that does not circulate is sick money. If Zayed were to look at the United States today, he would see an empire mired in its own wealth, unable to recognize that money has ceased to serve the people and has begun to enslave them. He would see a nation that confuses freedom with isolation, progress with acceleration, influence with domination. He would see a society that produces everything, but manufactures little meaning. He would not call this failure. He would call it forgetting. Because, in his view, true decline does not begin when numbers fall, but when the spirit empties. He believed that the West, and especially the United States, had become a prisoner of its own success. When man kneels before what he has built, he said, God reminds him that everything that rises without roots will fall with the wind. This was his warning, not in a tone of condemnation, but of natural destiny. The American empire would not need to be destroyed by external enemies. It would be consumed from within, by the fatigue of a soul that traded wisdom for speed. And here emerges what Arabs would call hikmah, the wisdom that only time teaches. Every civilization that loses its spirituality loses the right to lead. Zayed believed that the next global leadership would not necessarily come from the East or the West, but from whoever managed to balance wealth with morality, freedom with discipline, science with faith. This would be the new form of power, the power of balance. Sheikh Zayed saw the economy as an extension of ethics. In his mind, there was no difference between managing a household and managing a nation. Both required order, purpose, and limits. What impressed him about the West was its technical ability to produce, but what concerned him was its moral inability to restrain itself. American prosperity had become a river without banks. It grows, overflows, and destroys the soil it was meant to nourish. He knew from experience that nothing in nature grows infinitely without causing collapse. For this reason, he repeated that wealth must be managed like water in the desert, used with gratitude, shared with justice, and preserved with prudence. The Sheikh believed that the error of the United States was not ambition, but the lack of moderation. Consumption had become identity, debt a way of life, waste a symbol of success. When a man begins to measure value by what he throws away, he said, it is a sign that he has forgotten the value of what he has. And this observation was not only moral, it was economic. He understood that a system based on permanent debt and constant consumption would eventually erode the very foundation of trust that sustains it. The dollar to him was a collective illusion, strong because the world believes in it, but fragile because nothing solid truly supports it. By contrast, Arab tradition, and above all Zayed's vision, is based on the principle of sufficiency. Sufficiency is not poverty, it is wisdom. It is the awareness that excess generates scarcity. He believed that true prosperity is that which maintains balance between having and being. In the Emirates, this idea shaped entire policies, using oil to prepare the future, not merely to enrich the present. Zayed invested in education, infrastructure, and the environment because he knew that wealth without continuity is waste. Oil, he said, is a gift that can run out. Knowledge and faith are not. He observed that the United States was building its future on the debts of the past, while the Arab world, even with fewer resources, was learning to build on faith and solidarity. For Zayed, this was more than an economic difference. It was a difference of soul. The West saw growth as a race. The East saw growth as a pilgrimage. One runs to arrive first. The other walks to arrive whole. This difference in rhythm was, in his view, the turning point of the 21st century. The American economy depended on continuous consumption, but the planet could no longer sustain that model. Military strength upheld the empire, but the moral and social cost kept accumulating. Zayed viewed this situation with the serenity of one who already knew the law of nature. Everything that expands beyond measure begins to contract. He believed that the true end of an empire begins the moment it loses the ability to listen to the world that sustains it. While the West believed it could dominate everything with technology and capital, Sheikh Zayed believed that dominance without respect is merely another name for fragility. Power that does not restrain itself ends up being controlled by its own consequences. He said that arrogance is the tax imposed on wealth even before bankruptcy. What he saw in the United States was precisely this: a sophisticated economy, but blind to the spiritual cost of its lifestyle. Zayed believed that healing would come from the reconciliation between purpose and prosperity. Humanity would need to learn once again to serve what sustains it: the land, the community, and God. This would be, for him, the revolution of the future, not a war of weapons, but a war of consciousness. The Arab world, with its tradition of moderation and faith, held the remedy the West had forgotten: a sense of limits. He saw the desert not as emptiness, but as a silent teacher that shows that only what is sufficient is truly abundant. For Sheikh Zayed, the United States stood before an unavoidable choice: to continue pursuing growth at any cost or to remember the art of balance. If it continued down the first path, decline would be inevitable, not as divine punishment, but by natural logic. No human structure survives when it turns against its own equilibrium. If it chose the second, it could be reborn as an example of wisdom, using its material strength to sustain spiritual values. And that was what he always meant when he spoke about the end. The end is not collapse, it is correction. It is the moment when illusion dissolves and humanity is forced to look again at what is essential. For Zayed, the end of an empire does not have to be a tragedy. It can be an opportunity for maturity, but only if there is humility to listen to the wind before it turns into a storm. For Sheikh Zayed, no empire ends by accident. It ends when it forgets the reason for its existence. American power, in his reading, was proof of this ancient law, a civilization that managed to dominate almost everything except itself. Zayed saw the United States as a nation that traded prudence for speed, a country that turned the dream into merchandise, faith into spectacle, and knowledge into a tool of domination. All of this seemed to him grand and tragic at the same time. He did not believe that the end of the American empire would be a sudden explosion, but a slow erosion, shaped by excesses and contradictions. A system that feeds on infinite consumption on a finite planet, that speaks of freedom while multiplying dependencies, that speaks of innovation while repeating the same moral errors. For Zayed, decline never begins in the economy, but in the heart. And the heart of the United States was already showing signs of fatigue, extreme inequality, polarization, disbelief, emptiness. It was the soul of a people exhausted by their own abundance. From the Arab point of view, this exhaustion is no surprise. The desert teaches that life prospers when there is restraint. Excess kills. In the Gulf, those who waste water die. Those who respect it survive. This simple truth was the metaphor Zayed applied to the modern world. He saw the West wasting energy, food, time, and purpose, and calling it luxury. To him, it was a symptom of decline. The man who has everything begins to lose direction. The man who loses direction begins to seek power, and power, when it lacks moral guidance, turns against those who hold it. Zayed believed that the new century would belong to peoples who knew how to reintroduce balance. He believed that the material strength of the West and the spiritual strength of the East needed to meet, because one without the other cannot sustain the future. The West without soul produces perfect machines and broken people. The East without science produces sincere faith and practical impotence. Balance, he said, is the highest form of intelligence. He imagined a world in which wealth was managed as a trust rather than as a right, in which nations competed in virtue rather than vanity, a world that measured success not by GDP, but by the quality of human coexistence. This was the essence of his vision, replacing the race for accumulation with the art of care. The planet does not need more power, he said. It needs more purpose. Sheikh Zayed believed that the future was still open. No empire is condemned if it is still capable of humility. But he warned that humility arrives late for those who learn only through pain. The United States could still renew itself. It only needed to remember that leadership without example is merely imposition. It needed to return to serving the world instead of exploiting it. It needed to place the human being above profit once again. In the end, what he saw was not the end of America, but the end of an era of global arrogance, a time in which humanity believed it could create prosperity without ethics, progress without faith, and freedom without limits. That time, according to Zayed, was coming to an end, and that was good, because every ending that comes through truth is, in reality, a beginning. The future, he said, will be inherited not by the richest nor by the most armed, but by the most balanced. Those who know how to unite technology and compassion, science and moderation, power and justice. This is the message he would leave if he could speak to the world today. The empire that wishes to endure must relearn how to serve. What does not serve withers. What serves flourishes. And when the desert blooms, as it bloomed under his hands, it is because someone, in silence, chose balance once again.